The Tiger Cats visit the Alouettes on Saturday as the teams match up in the Eastern semifinal. The Owls swept the 3-game regular season series and are currently 3.5-point home favorites. Montreal won this matchup last season by a score of 28-17. Who do you believe wins to advance to the East Final against those Toronto Argonauts?
I've got the Montreal Alouettes, and my reasoning is pretty simple. The Alouettes went 11-0 this year against every team that wasn't BC, Toronto, or Winnipeg. Now, that bodes terribly for the Alouettes beyond this weekend because they went 0-7 against those teams. But to me, the Alouettes were consistently effective yet unspectacular, right? They don't turn the ball over a lot. Their defense is very good. They generate takeaways. Marc-Antoine Dequoy, I think, is going to be the most outstanding Canadian of the East Division, partly for his ability to generate those takeaways. The kicking game is a little bit of a concern, but that's really the only spot you can point to and say, look, that is not consistent about this team. Cody Fajardo's numbers were anything but spectacular, but again, he was consistent. He made few mistakes. He rarely put that team in a position where they were dealing with poor field position. And Joseph Zema, by the way, their punter, finished number 1 this year in net punting. And James Letcher Jr., what a revelation. He's been in the return game with Chandler Worthy out. So with all due respect to the Ticats, who I see as a bit more of a boom or bust team, I've got the Alouettes in this one because I think against competition that's a little below them, they are even keel and in a great opportunity to take advantage of that.
You mentioned that 11-0 record against teams with a sub 500 record. And to me, that almost seems too good to be true, right? It's proven time and time again, but when was the last time we saw somebody with a record like that not have it bust at some point? And to me, this feels like an opportunity where that trend all season long all of a sudden goes up in smoke against an opponent that you're very, very, very familiar with. Obviously, these two teams played last week. It wasn't necessarily the game plan that we will see this week, but they've played 3 times. I think it's tough to beat another opponent 4 times. And the Hamilton Tiger Cats, like you mentioned, Hodge, are boom or bust. And I think in this circumstance, they have a lot of boom potential. I love that Alouettes defense. They're going to be a real threat that Scott Milanovich is going to have to figure out how to beat. But the Alouettes offense doesn't scare me at all, with Cody Fajardo at the helm and William Stanback, who looks, let's be frank, a little bit past his prime at this stage. And there are some weapons on that Hamilton Tiger Cats offense that do scare me. Tim White being one and James Butler being the other in the backfield. And with that 2-quarterback system with Bill Levi Mitchell or Matthew Schultz, I think Orlando Steinhauer can ride the hot hand, whoever it may be in this game. And there's a potential for the Hamilton Tiger Cats to shock the world here and advance to the East Final.
I hate the 2-quarterback system. Bill Levi Mitchell even came out and said his younger self would not like it, and I totally understand it. But I do think the Tiger Cats are the smart play here on the spread and also on the money line for a number of reasons. Let's go with Montreal first because JC, you alluded to it. The offense is kind of blasé, but it's been effective. Cody Fajardo, by and large part, hasn't made a bunch of explosive plays or jaw-dropping kind of highlight reel moments, but he's been solid in terms of protecting the football, and they've really stuck to that run game. So that's a credit to Jason Moss. He said he was going to change his body language and his temperament. He's done that, and he's also run the ball more with the Alouettes. I think the Owls' defense is very much underrated, and Tyrese Beverette would like nothing more than to end the Ticats season yet again, because that's where he started his career. He's been outstanding. I don't think there's been enough talk about him. I agree with Hodge. Marc-Antoine Dequoy has been an absolute game changer. He's made big-time plays consistently throughout 2023, and Sean Lemon coming there infused that consistent pass rush that this team sorely needed. So it wouldn't surprise me if Montreal won. I actually think this is going to be a really close game, but similar to what JC alluded to with Hamilton. Tim White scares me. James Butler scares me on offense. Austin Mack can be really good, but I think we saw more plays from him earlier in the season, and now defenses have adjusted at least a little bit to him later in the year, and he hasn't had those big-time productive games like he had earlier in the year. So I like the way that Hamilton is trending. I think JC's made this point on this podcast before. Richard Leonard has played at a very high level for the Tiger Cats this season, should command a big payday in the offseason, whether that's re-signing with Hamilton or going elsewhere. He's a pending free agent. And I think that group has really come together. And the biggest part for me is Scott Milanovic running this offense now. It's a different voice. And I don't think Tommy Condell doesn't know offensive football, but I think that has just brought about a new energy around this group. So that's why I like the Tiger Cats against the spread, and also sprinkle some cashish on the money line.
Yeah, you said the line is 3.5. At that point, I would be tempted to put a little bit of money on Hamilton. I think 3 or less, I'm on the Montreal side because I do think the Alouettes are going to win this game. Here's a stat for you boys. The Alouettes have forced 48 takeaways this season. That ranks second in the CFL, and they are plus 14 in the turnover differential. That, to me, goes to show why they are so even keel and happy to be unspectacular, because why play a risky style of football when you are, on average, essentially winning the turnover battle by 1 per game, right? They went plus 14 over an 18-game season. Conversely, I'll use an example from the team we're going to talk about in the next segment. The BC Lions finished 12-6 this year, despite being minus 12 in the turnover differential. They finished 7th in takeaways. So to me, the Alouettes, the best definition I could give would be conservative but opportunistic, right? They wait for their opponents to make a mistake, and they take full advantage. A perfect example would be this past weekend when the Ticats fumbled the opening kickoff return. Tyree McAllister had the ball knocked out by Marc-Antoine Dequoy, and Cody Fajardo went, 2 plays? Boom, boom, into the end zone, Tyson Philpott. That's not how Montreal's offense generally looks. But they went, oh, you just stubbed your toe? Okay, well, now I'm going to make you eat it. Boom, 6 points in the first minute of the game. So to me, that is how the Alouettes have won all season. That formula's not worked against competition that's better. But this week, I do think they are the better team. And to touch quickly on the Ticats quarterback situation, I'll just say this. The Ticats, after a disappointing season from Dane Evans, they went out and they got what they expected was the CFL equivalent of a Ferrari, right? They went out and got Bo Levi Mitchell, and they paid him $500,000 to be their franchise guy.
Like an older model, though, not a new one.
Yeah, okay.
One that's been used a little bit.
A used Ferrari is still a Ferrari, my friend. And they paid a Ferrari price. And now, come the most important game of the year, they're going to leave their Ferrari in the garage willingly for parts of the race to turn it over to Matthew Schultz, who I do think is an underrated guy, but a guy who I would equate to like a Toyota RAV4. No disrespect to the Toyota RAV4. I drive a Toyota RAV4. It's a great vehicle, but it's not a Ferrari, and nobody would ever mistake it as such. So to me, the 2 quarterback system, whether it works or not, it did work, obviously, a couple years ago as Jeremiah Masoli and Dane Evans helped the Ticats get to a home Grey Cup in 2021. That's the Ticats' goal in 2023. But what I'm saying is, obviously, the Ticats should not be paying Ferrari price for Toyota RAV4 production.
We need a 3 Down Nation article comparing CFL quarterbacks to cars. I like it.
Someone get Josh on the line.
What's that car that exploded when it got hit? Because I feel like there's a Taylor Cornelius comparison there potentially, or I don't know. There's some lemons. Would it be the DeLorean?
Oh yeah.
I'm just thinking out loud here. Anyways,
to your point though, Hodge, about the quarterbacks and the turnovers, I think a lot of people are going to hear that statistic and how many turnovers that the Alouettes have generated this season and think that bodes extremely poorly for Bo Levi Mitchell, because we've seen at times over the last couple of years, he's been a little bit turnover prone. I mean, we go back to the first time he returned from injury this year and he threw 5 picks in that game and looked absolutely horrific, right? He's looked a lot better coming back. But to me, when I look at this matchup, I just keep going back to the West semifinal last year when I was in BC Place watching, and how the Calgary Stampeders looked terrific in that game until the fourth quarter when Bo Levi Mitchell came off the bench and all of a sudden, for a brief glimmer, for 15 minutes, looked like the Bo Levi Mitchell of old. And I think in a big moment when everything comes down and the chips are on the table, I still think Bo Levi Mitchell, for all his faults now, and there are many of them, has the capacity to turn it on and turn back the clock for a moment and be that guy. And if he can do it this week, it's going to be awfully hard for the Alouettes to beat them with an offense that I don't think can match up with the firepower.
The main thing about that comparison, though, JC, is there was no pressure on Bully Mitchell in that situation, right? They were going to go down guns a-blazing. Now there's the pressure of likely being the starter because it seems like that's what's going to happen here, and having expectations because he's a franchise guy just based on his Ferrari-level payment, according to Hodge. So I think it's different. That West semifinal, he'd come off the bench, chuck it around. If there were a couple picks and Calgary never got back in the game, well, it was over anyways.
I agree. And to be quite honest, I think if Levi Mitchell was going to put together that kind of performance and was capable of putting together that kind of performance for an extended period of time, we would have seen it this year. Yes, he had injuries, but he was healthy week 1. And I was at that game in Winnipeg, and he stunk. And he's done a lot of stinking since. So who knows? And by the way, the best story to come out of this game would be Levi Mitchell throwing for 5 touchdowns. So I'm not rooting against him. That would be amazing for 3 Down Nation if Levi Mitchell came out of the game of his life. I'm just saying I'm not holding my breath.
And the CFL. Like, if you're looking at it from the league office perspective, you'd rather have Levi Mitchell looking great, throwing it back, and then traveling down the QEW to Toronto than, I guess, what are we calling? Boring Montreal?
Well, could you imagine the hype in Hamilton for that Grey Cup if Levi Mitchell went out and threw 5 touchdowns in the East Semi and then knocked off the Argos in the East Final? My God, they'll have to double the beer orders.
Hodge, you're just feeding into everybody's CFL conspiracies.
I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. I'm saying if that were possible or if that happened, I don't think it's possible. I think if that was possible, we would have seen it this year. And one last note before we go to the next segment. Ferrari, if you're listening, we're open for sponsorships. I'd happily drive your vehicle as an endorsement.
I don't think they want that now that you've compared them to a broken down Levi Mitchell.
Yes.
Well, I didn't necessarily. I said that the Ticats thought they were getting a Ferrari, and they did. They paid for a Ferrari. Ferrari never came.
They thought they were getting the Ferrari that was in storage and hadn't been worked on in a while. Like, there's a recent story out there of a Ferrari, I think it was, that was buried because somebody stole it. Like, that's the kind of Levi Mitchell we're talking about. And you don't know if it's going to run. And the Ticats fired up that old Ferrari in week 1, like you said, and it didn't work. They needed to put in a lot of time to that engine to get it to the point where Levi Mitchell has looked the last handful of weeks. We'll see if it's actually tuned up in the East Semi.